Evil does not collapse because it is confronted. It collapses because it is finally left alone with itself. The narcissist did not lose their future because you fought back harder. They did not lose it because you exposed them publicly. They did not lose it because karma rushed in with thunder and spectacle. They lost it because they played games with something sacred, another human soul. And now, when the noise fades, when the audience leaves, when the manipulation no longer works, they are faced with a future they quietly destroyed, and they cannot bear to look at it. Narcissists do not play games for amusement. They play them for dominion. Control, to a narcissist, feels like oxygen. It is not merely preference, it is survival. Through gaslighting, emotional withdrawal, triangulation, and subtle cruelty, they attempt to bend reality itself. Not just your behavior, but your perception. Not just your choices, but your sense of self. In their mind, every relationship becomes a chessboard, every conversation a move, every emotion a lever, and for a while, it works. People comply, confusion spreads. The narcissist feels powerful, clever, superior. They mistake manipulation for wisdom and domination for strength. Like a child playing with fire, they believe themselves skilled because they have not yet been burned. But this illusion carries a fatal flaw. Control does not build a future. It only delays consequences. Control feels powerful at first, but it quietly rewires their future against them. Why the games escalate? Once manipulation succeeds, it cannot remain small. What once thrilled the narcissist soon feels dull. The first reaction that once made them feel powerful loses its effect. The confusion that once satisfied them fades faster than they expected. What initially felt intoxicating becomes insufficient, almost irritating. The narcissist discovers that control, like any counterfeit pleasure, has a very short lifespan, so the reaction must be stronger, the chaos more intense, the stakes higher. They escalate because they must. This escalation is not a sign of growing confidence. It is the opposite. It is the nervous system of a hollow self, demanding constant stimulation just to feel real. Control does not fill the emptiness inside the narcissist. It only distracts from it for a moment. And when that moment passes, the emptiness returns louder, heavier, more urgent. This is why the cruelty deepens. What once appeared as subtle manipulation becomes open disrespect. What once felt like emotional pressure turns into punishment. Boundaries are no longer negotiated. They are challenged, crossed, and mocked. The narcissist begins to test limits not out of curiosity, but out of fear. Fear that limits exist at all. The moment someone says, no, something inside the narcissist panics. They interpret boundaries as threats. They interpret independence as abandonment. They interpret self-respect as defiance. The narcissist is no longer trying to win you. They are trying to outrun their own emptiness. At this stage, their behavior is no longer about you as a person. You have become symbolic. You represent something unbearable to them, a self that does not collapse under their control. Your calm exposes their chaos. Your discernment exposes their deception. Your refusal to react exposes the lie they live by that domination equals worth. Every game becomes more reckless because the internal void grows louder. The narcissist is no longer responding to your words, your actions, or your intentions. They are responding to a gnawing fear that without control, without distortion, without superiority, they are nothing. This fear is not intellectual. It is existential. It lives beneath thought, beneath language, beneath logic, and it demands to be fed. So the games escalate, the manipulations grow riskier, the lies become bolder, the emotional tactics turn harsher. The narcissist begins gambling with relationships, reputations, and futures they once depended on. Stability becomes boring, peace becomes threatening, order becomes intolerable. Scripture speaks often of those who heap sin upon sin, not because they are bold, but because they are terrified to stop. Stopping would require stillness. Stillness would require reflection. Reflection would require accountability. And accountability would expose the false self they have spent a lifetime constructing. So they escalate instead. They double down on behavior that once worked, refusing to accept that the cost has changed. They mistake short-term reactions for long-term power. They confuse fear with respect. They interpret silence as weakness rather than withdrawal. But escalation always leaves evidence. Trust erodes quietly. People step back without explanation. Opportunities close without confrontation. The narcissist senses the shift, but misreads it. They believe they must assert more control, press harder, dominate faster. They fail to see that the future is already responding to them differently. What they call strength is actually panic wearing armor. Escalation is not confidence. It is panic in disguise. And panic, no matter how cleverly dressed, is never a foundation for the future. The moment the future starts collapsing, the collapse of a narcissist's future rarely arrives with drama. There is no single confrontation that ends everything, no public exposure that suddenly destroys their standing, no instant reckoning that forces them to face what they have done. Instead, the collapse begins quietly, almost invisibly, while the narcissist is still convinced they are winning. It starts when trust no longer forms naturally. People begin to hesitate. Conversations feel guarded. Promises are taken less seriously. Opportunities that once appeared easily now require explanations, reassurance, and proof. The narcissist senses resistance, but does not understand it. They assume others have changed, grown distant, or become unreasonable. They never consider that their own patterns are being noticed. This is how the future starts collapsing, not through attack, but through withdrawal. All the while, the narcissist remains focused on the game. They are still replaying old strategies, still provoking reactions, still measuring power by emotional impact rather than moral weight. Because of this, they miss the most important shift of all. The environment has changed. People are no longer participating. Allies become neutral. Neutral people become distant. Distant people quietly disappear. The narcissist feels less influence, less access, less leverage. And instead of stopping to reflect, they intensify. They assume the solution is more pressure, sharper manipulation, stronger control. But this only accelerates the collapse. The future does not punish loudly, it responds logically. When someone repeatedly demonstrates instability, trust erodes. When someone treats relationships as arenas, cooperation fades. When someone refuses accountability, credibility weakens. None of this requires moral outrage. It happens automatically. Doors begin to close without explanation. The narcissist does not see the door closing because they are still looking backward, still trying to extract value from past dynamics that no longer exist. They mistake silence for strategy, distance for defiance, absence for weakness, and so they continue playing games in an empty room. By the time they notice something is wrong, the damage is already done. The future is not lost in a single moment, it is lost in a series of unnoticed consequences. Lost when people stop vouching for them. Lost when their word carries less weight. Lost when patterns speak louder than charm. Lost when discernment replaces confusion in the people around them. This is the most dangerous moment for the narcissist. Because the collapse does not feel dramatic enough to demand repentance, it feels unfair. misunderstood, undeserved. And so instead of humility, resentment grows. Instead of reflection, blame multiplies. Instead of change, denial hardens. They tell themselves the world is against them. They tell themselves others are ungrateful. They tell themselves they are still in control. But control no longer produces results. The narcissist is now living in the echo of former influence. The reactions are weaker, the attention thinner, the authority hollow, and deep inside they sense something they cannot name. The future is slipping away, and they do not know how to retrieve it. This is where anxiety replaces confidence. Not the visible kind. Often, the narcissist still appears composed, but the deeper kind that lives beneath performance. A growing awareness that time is moving forward, and the ground beneath them is no longer solid. That relationships are no longer repairable through charm alone, that some losses cannot be reversed by manipulation. Yet even here they do not stop. Because stopping would mean facing the truth, that the collapse did not come from bad luck, betrayal, or misunderstanding, but from choices repeated until consequences became permanent. And that truth is heavier than they can carry, what they actually lost and can't admit. The narcissist tells themselves they lost you. They repeat this story quietly, sometimes obsessively, because it is the only version of events they can tolerate. Losing you allows them to remain the victim. It allows them to believe the damage was relational, circumstantial, or unfortunate but not moral. But this is not what they actually lost. What they lost cannot be replaced by a new supply, a new environment, or a revised narrative. They lost something far more fundamental, something that cannot be recovered once enough time has passed. They lost trust, not only your trust, but the unspoken trust of others who watched, sensed, and slowly understood what kind of person they were dealing with. Trust does not disappear loudly. It thins, it weakens, it stops forming. And when trust is gone, every future interaction becomes conditional. They lost credibility. Words that once carried weight now require proof. Promises that once inspired confidence now raise questions. People listen politely, but they no longer lean in. The narcissist still speaks, still asserts, still explains, but the authority behind their voice has quietly eroded. They lost stability. A future requires consistency, emotional, relational, moral, but a life built on games cannot remain steady. Every manipulation introduces instability. Every lie creates tension. Every distortion requires maintenance. Over time, the narcissist's world becomes exhausting to sustain, even for themselves. Most devastating of all, they lost who they could have become. This is the loss they cannot face. They lost the future version of themselves that might have been capable of real intimacy, enduring respect, and inner peace. They lost the possibility of relationships that did not require control. They lost the chance to build something that would outlast their charm. This loss does not announce itself. It reveals itself slowly, through comparison. They see others grow steadier, while they remain restless. They see others deepen, while they remain performative. They see others mature, while they repeat the same cycles. And instead of grief, something darker takes root. Resentment, because to grieve would require admission. To admit would require responsibility, and responsibility threatens the false self they have protected at all costs. So they tell themselves another story. They say you were the problem. They say the timing was wrong. They say people misunderstood them. They say they were too good, too giving, too trusting. But beneath every explanation lies an unbearable awareness. The losses they are experiencing are not accidental. They are cumulative. Each manipulation closed a door. Each act of disrespect weakened a foundation. Each refusal to self-correct narrowed the future. The narcissist feels this narrowing as pressure, as frustration, as an undefined sense of being trapped. Time no longer feels expansive, it feels threatening. Because the longer they live without facing the truth, the harder it becomes to reclaim what was lost. This is why they cannot admit it. Admission would not only expose what they did to others, it would expose what they did to themselves. It would force them to acknowledge that the future they now fear is the one they carefully constructed, choice by choice, and that recognition is too heavy for a personality built on avoidance. So they remain caught between denial and regret, unable to move forward, unwilling to look back honestly. A future cannot be built on what they lost, and deep down they know it. Why they can't face what they've done. There comes a point when avoidance is no longer a tactic, it becomes a way of survival. By the time the narcissist senses what they have lost, the truth has grown too heavy to approach directly. Facing it would no longer mean acknowledging a single mistake or regrettable choice. It would mean confronting a pattern, a history, a long line of decisions that all point in the same direction. And that is something the narcissistic psyche is not built to endure. To face what they have done would require responsibility without excuse, not explanation, not justification, not reframing, responsibility. It would require them to admit that harm was not accidental, that damage was not misunderstood, and that outcomes were not caused by others' sensitivity or weakness. This level of honesty threatens the very structure of the false self. The narcissist survives by maintaining a particular internal story, that they are fundamentally right, justified, exceptional, or unfairly treated. This story cannot coexist with moral reckoning. If the truth enters fully, the narrative collapses, and with it, the identity they have depended on for stability. So they look away. They tell themselves they are misunderstood rather than wrong. They focus on how they were hurt rather than how they harmed. They magnify the flaws of others to drown out their own. This is not ignorance. It is self-protection. Facing the truth would not simply cause shame, it would require grief. Grief for the relationships they damaged. Grief for the future they undermined. Grief for the person they might have been if they had chosen humility instead of control. Grief requires softness. Softness requires vulnerability. And vulnerability feels fatal to someone whose entire life has been organized around domination. So instead of facing the truth, they distort it. They rewrite history until it feels tolerable. They edit memories, reassign motives, and selectively forget moments that contradict their self-image. Over time, these distortions harden into belief. The narcissist begins to live inside a version of reality where accountability is always external and fault never fully lands on them. But distortion has a cost. The more they avoid truth, the more fragmented their inner world becomes. Contradictions multiply. Justifications pile up. Emotional tension rise. The narcissist becomes increasingly reactive, not because others are attacking them, but because reality keeps pressing in from the edges. This is why they often appear defensive or hostile when confronted gently. Even simple questions feel dangerous. Even calm feedback feels like accusation. The truth does not need to be spoken loudly to be threatening, it only needs to be accurate. Deep down, the narcissist senses that facing what they have done would demand change they do not know how to make. Change would require patience, restraint, empathy, consistency. These are skills formed through humility, not performance. So they remain frozen. They live forward in time while refusing to look backward honestly. They move through relationships without learning from them. They repeat patterns not because they want to, but because they cannot afford to stop and reflect. This is the paradox. Avoidance feels like protection, but it becomes imprisonment. The narcissist is not free from guilt. They are surrounded by it. They simply lack the internal structure to process it in a healthy way. And so guilt turns inward, reshaping itself into anger, resentment, and blame. They cannot face what they have done not because the truth is unclear, but because it is too clear. And until they are willing to stand still in that clarity, the future will remain something they fear rather than build. The shame loop they're trapped in. Unfaced guilt does not disappear. It reorganizes the soul. When the narcissist refuses to confront what they have done, shame does not resolve, it circulates. It moves underground, shaping reactions, moods, and behaviors from behind the scenes. What cannot be named begins to rule. What cannot be confessed begins to command. This is the shame loop. It begins quietly, a vague irritation, a persistent restlessness, an unspoken sense that something is wrong but nowhere specific to place it. The narcissist tells themselves they are merely stressed, misunderstood, or surrounded by difficult people. But the discomfort does not lift, it tightens. Because shame that is not acknowledged does not soften, it hardens. Instead of remorse, it produces defensiveness. Instead of humility, it generates resentment. Instead of repair, it fuels withdrawal or aggression. The narcissist becomes increasingly reactive, not because others are attacking them, but because their inner world is collapsing under unprocessed guilt. They lash out at small things. They take offense easily. They interpret neutral interactions as threats. The world feels hostile because the self feels exposed. This is where anger enters the loop. Anger provides temporary relief. It feels active. It feels powerful. It pushes shame outward, allowing the narcissist to feel justified rather than accountable. But anger cannot sustain itself. It burns quickly and leaves behind the same unresolved weight, now heavier, now more corrosive. So the cycle repeats. Shame gives way to anger. Anger gives way to blame. Blame gives way to isolation. Isolation feeds shame. Over time, this loop reshapes the narcissist's personality. They grow colder, more cynical, less capable of genuine connection, not because they have become stronger, but because vulnerability now feels intolerable. Every interaction carries risk. Every relationship threatens exposure. They may still appear confident on the surface. They may still perform competence, charm, or authority. But beneath the performance is a growing fear that someone might see through them, or worse, that they might finally see themselves. This is why they avoid stillness. Silence offers no distraction. Solitude offers no audience. Reflection offers no escape. So they keep moving. They seek stimulation. They chase validation. They provoke reactions. Anything to avoid the quiet moment where shame might speak clearly. But shame does speak, eventually. It speaks through insomnia, through bitterness, through the quiet envy of others' peace, through the sense that time is moving forward while they remain stuck. The narcissist becomes trapped between who they pretend to be and who they fear they are. This internal split is exhausting. Maintaining it requires constant effort, constant defense, constant distortion of reality. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to break. Because breaking the loop would require confession not to others first, but to themselves. It would require naming harm without justification, feeling grief witut redirecting it, accepting responsibility without bargaining. And this feels unbearable, so the loop remains intact. What appears from the outside as arrogance is often exhaustion. What looks like indifference is often despair. What seems like defiance is often shame that has nowhere left to go. This is not freedom. It is containment. The narcissist is no longer running toward pleasure or power. They are running from themselves. And every step they take deepens the grooves of the loop they cannot escape, until something interrupts it. Why your walking away sealed their fate. Your walking away did not punish the narcissist. It revealed them. As long as you remained engaged, the game could continue. Your reactions, whether loving, angry, confused, or defensive, gave the narcissist something essential: relevance. Even conflict kept the illusion alive. Even pain could be reframed as proof of influence. But when you stepped away, something irreversible occurred. The stage emptied. Without your presence, there was no one left to provoke, no one left to distort, no one left to blame convincingly. The narcissist lost their most reliable mirror, the one that reflected power back to them through emotional reaction. What remained was silence, and silence is merciless to illusion. This is why walking away sealed their fate. Not because it harmed them directly, but because it removed the conditions that allowed denial to survive. Without access to you, the narcissist was forced into proximity with their own consequences. The patterns they once projected outward now circled inward. The chaos they created no longer had a target. For the first time, the game stopped working. No explanation you could have given would have accomplished this. No confrontation would have achieved the same effect. Walking away did what words never could. It ended participation. And when participation ends, manipulation collapses. This is where the contrast becomes unavoidable. As you withdrew, you began to stabilize. Your nervous system quieted. Your clarity returned. Your sense of self strengthened. You did not become louder. You became steadier. You did not prove anything, you simply moved forward. And this movement exposed the truth. The narcissist did not lose power because you took it from them. They lost power because it was never real to begin with. It depended entirely on access, reaction, and proximity. Once those were gone, there was nothing left to maintain the illusion. Meanwhile, the narcissist remained stuck. They repeated the same stories, the same grievances, the same explanations. Time moved forward, but their inner world did not. This is the moment many never see, the moment when absence becomes the loudest verdict of all. Your silence was not cruelty, it was closure, and closure is devastating to someone who survives on unresolved tension. The narcissist could no longer define themselves against you. They could no longer rewrite the past convincingly. They could no longer blame you for the present. What remained was consequence. This is why walking away feels so final to them, not emotionally but existentially. It confirms what they have spent their lives avoiding, that their influence was conditional, their control fragile, and their games ultimately self-defeating. You did not seal their fate by leaving. You simply stopped protecting them from it. This contrast reveals the deeper lesson beneath it all. Games always cost more than they promise. Every game makes an offer. It promises advantage without integrity, control without character, power without responsibility. To the narcissist, manipulation feels like efficiency, a shortcut through the moral order of life. It appears clever. It appears effective, and for a time it appears to work. But every game hides its cost. What the narcissist never truly considers is that manipulation does not merely damage others, it reshapes the one who practices it. Each distortion weakens the capacity for honesty. Each lie trains the soul to avoid reality. Each small victory purchased through control hollows out something essential that no future can replace. This is the deeper lesson beneath everything that has unfolded. A future is not built on outcomes. It is built on character. Games promise control, but they corrode reliability. They promise protection, but they destroy trust. They promise dominance, but they sabotage endurance. Over time, the narcissist gains moments and loses decades. What looks like power in the present becomes fragility in the long term. This is why manipulation always turns inward. A person who treats truth as flexible eventually loses confidence in their own perception. A person who uses people as instruments eventually finds themselves alone. A person who believes consequences can be negotiated eventually collides with a reality that does not bargain. The narcissist does not lose their future because someone exposes them. They lose it because deception cannot sustain life. Games require constant maintenance. Stories must be protected. Blame must be reassigned. Reality must be edited endlessly. This produces vigilance, not peace. Tension, not rest. Performance, not growth. The narcissist becomes a caretaker of illusions, rather than a builder of anything real. And illusion cannot age well. Time reveals what charm hides. Patterns surface. Discernment replaces confusion. What once impressed begins to exhaust. Relationships thin not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. The future narrows, not as punishment, but as consequence. This is where the focus must return to you. This message is not given to elevate you above others. It is given so you may feel grounded. It teaches that walking away from manipulation is not weakness, it is alignment with moral order. It affirms that silence can be wisdom, that restraint can be strength, and that peace is not something you must defend when it is rooted in truth. You learn that justice does not need spectacle, that accountability does not require confrontation, that truth, when given space, does its own work. The narcissist played games with reality, and reality responded, not with revenge, not with cruelty, but with withdrawal, and that is the final lesson. What cannot be built on truth cannot survive time. A future grows where integrity is chosen. It withers where manipulation reigns. And no one escapes that order, not because it is harsh, but because it is real.